Here begins videotape number 1 of the deposition of, please state your name for the record.
Ashley Hurst.
In the matter of Dennis Allen versus Burks, MD, et al., to be heard in Circuit Court of Baltimore City, Maryland. Case number 24-C-15-3384-MM. Today's date is August the 12th, year 2016. The time on the video monitor is now 1:09 p.m. The video operator today is Scott Pickering. This video deposition is taking place at the University of Maryland at 29 South Green Street, Baltimore, Maryland. Counsel, please voice identify yourselves and state who you represent.
Rodney M. Gaston. I represent Cynthia Allen, the estate of Dennis Allen, and Dennis Allen's surviving children.
Good afternoon, Ronald Shaw. I represent Dr. Alan Burks and the University of Maryland Medical System.
The court report today is Sue Smith of DTI Court Reporting Solutions. For the report, please swear in the witness.
Ms. Hurst, did you raise your right hand? Do you declare and/or affirm, under the penalties of perjury, the testimony you're about to give is the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Ma'am, could you please state your name and business address?
Yes, Ashley Hurst. Business is University of Maryland Medical Center, 22 South Green Street, Baltimore, Maryland.
Ma'am, have you ever been deposed before?
No.
Okay. I want to go over just some brief rules so we can get an accurate recording of the deposition. Even though you're being videotaped, the court reporter here is taking down all my questions and all of your answers. It's hard for her to take down testimony if we both talk at the same time. So I'll just ask if you could be very patient with me and wait till I finish asking my questions before you start to answer, and then I'll try not to interrupt you. If at any time I ask you a question and you don't understand it, please let me know immediately and stop me, and I'll try to rephrase the question. Otherwise, if you don't, we will assume that you've understood the question and the answer that you gave is the answer that you intended to give. Also, if at any time you need to take a break, just let us know. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Ma'am, I'll show you what's been marked as exhibit number 1. Is that a current and accurate copy of your CV?
It is.
All right. And it looks like you've been employed at University of Maryland Hospital. If I can have that back so I can just take a look at it. Thank you. From May of 2005 until the current date.
Correct.
Okay. Your current position is Quality Assurance Specialist. Is that correct?
Correct.
Have you always held that position here at the hospital?
As long as I've been part of the University of Maryland Medical Center, yes.
Okay. All right. Now, I know you have an outline here of what some of your duties are, but if you can just explain them to me in a few words, generally your day-to-day activities here at the hospital.
Sure. Day-to-day activities are making sure that we follow, keep our accreditation. We're accredited by certain organizations. So my coworker and I make sure that we are doing all the required regulatory things that we need to do. We attend meetings. We do safety audits for the department. We do new employee orientation and training.
You have to speak up just a little bit.
Oh, sorry. Okay. We do new employee orientation and training, safety. We are the keepers of what we call variances, things that we document, any kinds of issues that we may have.
And what department are you talking about?
So this is the Laboratories of Pathology.
Does that lab involve blood work at the hospital?
Yes.
Okay. Does it involve the staffing and supervision of the technicians who draw blood from patients in the hospital?
Yes.
Yeah. Ma'am, can you tell me, and your lawyer can help us out, with what topics you're here to testify about?
So referring to the notice to take corporate designee deposition under Roman numeral 1, paragraphs 16, 17, and 18,
Okay.
which pertain to blood draws.
Okay. Ma'am, under paragraph number 16, and you can look and I'll read it out loud as to what you're here to testify to, is to be able to explain any and all policies, procedures, guidelines, and or protocols which apply to any person who is drawing blood from a patient, to include those persons who specifically drew blood or attempted to draw blood from Dennis Allen while he was in a patient at UMMS. This should include how to document the order, how to document the blood draw, and how to document the processing of the blood by the lab. Okay. Can you explain the procedures and guidelines that apply to the persons or persons who drew blood or tried to draw blood from Mr. Allen while he was at a patient at the hospital?
And do you want to do it from what she can remember, or can she refer to documents?
If you can remember, and if you need to refer to any policies or procedures that have been provided, you can do that as well.
Okay. I just want to be clear, this is for the phlebotomists that draw blood. Only the phlebotomists.
Okay, and is that the person who attempted to draw blood from Mr. Allen on March 18th, would that be the phlebotomist?
I'm not sure, I don't know, I'm not sure which. I mean, there was several blood draws, so.
Okay, well, all right, what I need to know, if you're familiar to testify to the procedures that applied for the person who tried to draw Mr. Allen's blood at about 4:50 a.m. on March 18, 2013. Can you do that?
I can talk about the procedures that we use to draw blood.
But it would have to be specifically for this person as well.
Well, there are some records specifically for this person that apply to a phlebotomist. What she's saying is if there were blood draws by the nurses on the floor at other than routinely scheduled times, then she can't speak to that.
Correct.
That's not what she's being asked
Correct.
to speak to.
Right,
Okay.
ma'am. I'm not talking
Okay.
about nurses.
Okay.
I'm just talking about the persons who come in who are routinely scheduled to take the blood draw. And this time there was a quote 4:30 a.m. blood draw, and I think it was by a phlebotomist.
Yes.
Are we on the same page?
Yeah.
Okay,
Just-
good. All right. Tell me generally what your knowledge of the procedures are, and these would be the procedures in effect on March 18th of 2013.
Correct, yes. So we had, at that time, we had a list that was generated of patients in the morning that would need to be have blood drawn by phlebotomist. Those are divided out between the phlebotomists. They would get their list, they would go up to the unit, and the people on their list, if they were to draw, they would go to those rooms. They would make sure that they identify the patient, whoever the first person is on their list. They identify that patient, name and date of birth if they're able, or name and date of birth if they're able to communicate that. They also check an ID band to make sure it's the correct person. Once they have done that, then they would have their labels that would tell them what to draw, what needs to be drawn for the tests that were ordered. They would do the stick, the phlebotomy, draw the blood, label the blood sample, and then that would go back to the laboratory either via the pneumatic tube system if that's available, or they would take it back themselves for processing and testing.
Okay. Now, are the records, I know that some records were provided in this case with respect to Mr. Allen's blood draw, and are those records kept separate and apart from his hospital chart?
So if it's the list
I
I'm
just wanna make
thinking
sure-
of,
Yeah, I
yes.
want to make sure we're talking about the same
sure.
record.
You can go to the documents that have been produced.
Can you tell me which document
Yeah,
you're referring
just a
to?
minute.
Referring to tab 35
Let's see.
under Exhibit 4?
Yes, sir, I am.
Yes.
Okay,
So we would keep these in phlebotomy. That would be our record of who went to what floor to
Okay.
draw. So yes.
And how are they kept? Are they kept in paper file? Are they scanned into the system and the paper file's destroyed? How did that work back in March of 2013?
They would be not scanned. They would be kept, but for how long, I don't know. They would be kept by the department for a certain period of time. I don't know how long.
Okay.
And then they would go to Iron Mountain, which is where this was. We pulled this one back.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yes,
Where did
we
you get the documents
We did.
from?
We pulled it back from Iron Mountain. I'm not sure how long we keep them, but
Okay. And what are these little barcode squares that we see? And there's a number on the first page that says 72, 71, 68.
Yes.
Can you tell me what they represent?
Yes, so the barcode is actually a sticker or a label that is put on here, and that will tell the phlebotomist who to draw. And the number beside it is the bed number of the patient.
And the patient's name, it looks like it had been excised, but the patient's name would be on each of these barcodes at the top?
Correct, correct.
All right,
Well,
now,
Well-
for HIPAA purposes, we
Yes, we only have
deleted
the one.
everybody's.
One at a time.
Yeah, for HIPAA's purpose, we deleted every name except for Mr. Allen's, which is at the bottom left-hand side.
now, what did the initials DO, is that a DO? I don't know what that is. If you can explain that
I
correctly.
can.
Go ahead.
That is a DJ, and that's the employee, the phlebotomist initials, Demetrius Jones.
Okay. And are all of these, all these on the first page by Demetrius Jones?
So where there is the D and the J, it kind of looks like an O, but that's a J. That means that is her initials, and she has drawn that patient.
Okay. How do you know that the blood was drawn from just these simple stickers?
So this is really a worksheet for the phlebotomist to know where to go and what to draw. Once they drew the blood, it would be labeled. There's a barcode label on there. It would come to the lab, and then it would be scanned in, and testing would be performed from there.
Okay, because I noticed on page 1, sometimes this phlebotomist wrote done, and other times there's nothing on the notations. Can you tell me is there a rhyme or reason for that?
So if the phlebotomist drew blood from that person, that her initials would be there, the DJ. If there was something else that occurred, there could be another notation. Some of them, maybe there's one note there that I can see that says all labs done by the night nurse. So all other labs done by the night nurse. So that means they drew, some of them were already done, they just drew whatever was left. There was one that says discharged. So it could be multiple reasons why they did not draw that patient, but
Okay.
without the initials on there, then that would mean they did not draw it.
So without the initials means there was no draw?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. All right. Now, so if there is a draw, then they put the initials there, and that's a way for telling the phlebotomy section that was completed.
Correct.
Okay. Is there any other document that the phlebotomist has to return back to the department other than this worksheet with their initials on it and comments?
Back to the phlebotomy department.
Right, phlebotomy department.
And this is at that time.
Yes, ma'am.
At that time, we did have a larger label called a clinical label. It's just a big sticker. That is where they would also write their initials of when their initials that they drew it. That comes back to the lab, and that is only kept for about a week or so, and then that is discarded. It's not a permanent record, so that is not kept.
Other than this chart and the label you just testified to, is there any other documentation that would exist in the phlebotomy department with respect to a particular blood draw for a patient in March of 2013?
Not to my knowledge that I'm aware of.
Now, on the second page, date, time, round unit, there's some initials there. Can you tell me what that represents?
Yes, so that's the first part there is the phlebotomist's name, and it may be age. I'm not clear, to be honest with you, what the name is, but it would be the phlebotomist's name, and then it says 11 p.m. and then it says 3/18. So that would be the 11 p.m. rounding, regular routine rounding for that phlebotomist in 3/18.
Can you tell from this record who was the phlebotomist that was assigned to draw Mr. Allen's blood in the morning hours of March 18, 2013?
It would be whoever that person's name is at the top, and I'm not quite sure who that
Is
is.
there any way for you to identify that person as we sit here today?
No.
In the first box, there's some, I can't read what's written in that first box, that handwritten. Can you interpret that for me?
I cannot read it either.
The second, can you interpret
The
that?
second I can, and that's a little clear. The first, it's initials. It looks like AM to me, but I cannot be sure. I don't know what phlebotomist drew this.
Okay.
And underneath it, it says patient PT refused.
Okay, and how about the next box?
And the second one says, again, I believe it's the initials of the phlebotomist, and it says OTF off the floor. Patient was not in their room.
Is this sheet, there's 3 labels, were these blood draws attempted to be done by the same phlebotomist or by different ones?
That's my understanding. It would be that phlebotomist's work for that draw time, yes.
Okay, all right. Now, you can go to specific policies and procedures that have been provided, or if you can, and you can tell me from your own recollection. How do you define a patient's refusal to have their blood drawn? Is there a particular definition that you use?
I think, we just use the word refusal. They won't allow you to draw their blood.
Okay. Is there a procedure or a different notation that the phlebotomist places if the phlebotomist himself or herself sticks the patient 3 times and can't find the vein?
Yes.
Okay, what is that?
Unable to obtain, UTO.
Now, what if after the 3rd time the patient says, can you get somebody else to do it for me? Is that classified as can that be classified as unable to obtain or a refusal?
That would be however the phlebotomist documents that. I don't know if there's a standard way to do that.
That's what I'm asking her. Is there any standard procedures where a patient with a phlebotomist tries 3 times, can't get the blood, and then the patient asks him, can you find someone else to do it? Is there any procedures that apply to that situation?
Not that I am aware of.
Okay. Do you know what the phlebotomists are taught with respect to that situation? If they are even taught with respect to that situation?
I know they are. There's a policy in here that talks about what to do if they refuse.
Let's go to that policy if we could.
I'm not sure what is in your book.
Is it-
The other one that says problem draw. Let me do this next one. Here we go.
Okay, so it's tab 36 under Exhibit 4.
Thank you. Okay, I'm at tab 36 under Exhibit 4. Is this the policy and procedure that was in place in March of 2013 for problem draws?
Yes.
Do you know how this was promulgated, how this was developed?
I do not.
Okay. All right. And I don't see anything listed in this policy that gives a phlebotomist guidelines as to what to do if they are unable after the 3rd time and the patient says, could you find somebody else?
I'm going to check one other
Yes, ma'am.
policy.
Go right ahead. And if you can tell me where you're looking?
Yes, I'm looking on tab 37.
Yes?
Procedure for drawing blood on inpatient.
Okay.
And in the middle, number 2, if for any reason a person cannot have their blood drawn, the following procedure will be followed. Name of the patient, reason why you are unable to obtain the draw. Example, UTO, patient off the floor, the time and your initials on the communication log. And then we would bring the label back downstairs to try to have someone else draw it, or they would put it in with the next routine draw.
Okay. And CLN, what does CLN
So
mean?
CLN is it's a label, clinical label. It's, that I mentioned earlier that the phlebotomist would write their initial on there and the time or the date when they drew the blood. They would bring that down with them and say they were not able to, for whatever reason, weren't able to get it, and then the next phlebotomist would go up at the routine time to collect.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to look at paragraph 2B, if you would.
Yes.
It's the second sentence. If the patient has been discharged, gone to OR, etc., then they should be resulted in Cerner. Now, what is Cerner?
So Cerner is our laboratory information system that we use. So they would make a notation in there that the patient had gone to the OR, been discharged.
Is that separate and apart from the hospital computer system?
That is, we've changed, so let me think. At the time, nursing and lab were on Cerner, different parts of Cerner, but Cerner.
And would that be part of the patient's general chart?
I am not sure if that's where that comment goes or who can see that or where it would go.
Okay. Have there been times where a phlebotomist has come back and said, I tried 2 times, I'm unable to get the blood, can we have someone else go and do it?
Yes, that does happen.
Is that noted, or do you simply send someone else to try to do it?
It would be noted on a communication log in the nursing unit at the nurse's station that they were unable to obtain a sample.
And who would place that notation in the communication
The
log?
phlebotomist would write that in their communication log.
And now, when you mean communication log, I'm trying to see, is that the patient's chart itself?
No.
Okay. Can the phlebotomist enter any information into the patient's chart similar to what a nurse can enter into a patient's chart?
No. We
Okay.
have a separate system we enter into. We entered into Cerner, which is our laboratory information system, which is different than at the time nursing used Cerner Power Chart. We use Cerner PathNet. 2 separate sections. We enter things into PathNet. They
So-
can see it in Power Chart, but I could not explain how that happens.
So nurses could, the phlebotomists enter it into PathNet, but the nurses can see it in PowerChart?
I do not know where they enter it, and if it's a comment or something that the nurses can see, I do not know that.
Okay. But in a case where if there is a refusal of the patient, then the phlebotomist is supposed to come back and enter that into PathNet?
Objection. Go ahead.
I don't know. I don't know how it gets entered into the Cerner computer system,
Is it supposed to be entered into the Cerner?
and
computer
I don't
system?
know that either.
Is there a reason why? Is there, you just don't remember back in 2013 if that's what the policy was?
I have
Or-
not seen a policy that explains how you, what they enter into, what the phlebotomists enter when.
All right. If there is a refusal, is the phlebotomist supposed to notify the nurse on the floor?
Objection. If you know.
Anytime they can't get the blood draw, they try to notify the nurse. They're not always able to reach the nurse. That's why they have the communication log, so that they can make sure that they document that we weren't able to get this person.
Why do you say they're not always able to notify the nurse? I don't understand that.
The nurse is taking care of more than one patient.
Yeah, but, well, wait a minute. Is the policy, I'm going to be very specific on the policy. If for any reason the phlebotomist is unable to draw the patient's blood, are not they supposed to notify the nurse?
That is,
Objection. Go ahead.
that's my understanding.
Okay. In tab number 36, there's a handwritten note at the top which says, "I fought this in our policy and procedure manual." Wendy Wiley? Do you know who that lady is?
I do.
What is her full name?
Well, I'm going to object to this because I think this was produced. That handwriting should not have been produced, but in any event. So you can ask who Wendy Wiley is. I'm not going to let her answer if she even knows what this statement means.
Who's Wendy Wiley?
She is a phlebotomist.
Is she currently employed in your department?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, policy and procedural manual. Is there a separate policy and procedure manual in the phlebotomy department other than what's been produced here?
You do not have the full procedure manual for the phlebotomy
Okay.
team. No.
All right. Are there other pages of the procedural manual in the phlebotomy department that deal with situations such as this, where phlebotomists go in to draw the patient's blood, they're unable to, for whatever reason, to draw it, and it directs them what they should do when that happens?
Well, so I object as to that question because that supposes a foundation that's not necessarily accurate. So I object to that question. It asks you to remove from that question what happened in this situation, and I'll let her answer the question.
Ma'am, are there other written policies and procedures in the phlebotomy manual that address the phlebotomist drawing a patient's blood and deals with those situations where the phlebotomist cannot draw the patient's blood?
You can answer.
Say it again, please. Repeat
Okay.
that.
All right. We've already established that we don't have the entire phlebotomy procedure manual, correct?
Correct.
What I'm trying to ask is, we've only been produced with a couple of pages, actually, a couple of pages here. I'm asking you if there are other pages in that policy and procedural manual that address the phlebotomist drawing patient's blood and address those situations where there is a problem draw or the phlebotomist cannot get the patient's blood.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. All right. Can you tell me, it looks like the policies and procedures under number 37 were discontinued November 8, 2015?
Correct.
The problem draw, which is in tab number 36, that policy and procedure, can you tell me when that was instituted?
Can I look at my my notes?
Sure.
That's all I have.
Okay.
So I have that the procedure was revised in 2013, January 2013.
So this procedure, the page we have in page 36, was in effect as of January 2013?
Correct. To the best of my knowledge, yes.
All right. And when there is, for whatever reason, the phlebotomist is unable to get the patient's blood, then that order is simply carried over into the next scheduled blood draw?
That is normally what happens.
Do you know if that's what happened in this case or not?
Objection, I instruct you not to answer that question.
What are the other circumstances when a blood drawn is, when a phlebotomist comes back and advises their supervisor that the patient refused to get the blood drawn? Are there times when the supervisor would then send someone else down?
Yes.
Okay. Is that part of the policy and procedure?
Can you repeat that first? Repeat your
Sure.
question again.
Phlebotomist comes back and says, I tried to get the patient's blood. I tried 3 times. I couldn't. The patient said, okay, enough's enough. Does then the supervisors then try to get another phlebotomist to come back down and get the blood?
I'd like to add a little bit more
Sure.
to that.
Mhm.
So if sometimes the nurse will talk with the patient or the doctor and say, we really need to get this. If they want us, if the nurse or the clinician wants another phlebotomist to come up and try, they will do that. So yes, that can happen. But if the patient refused and you walk back in the room and they say, no, go away, I don't want you to draw my blood, then they would not do that.
Okay. So in those cases where, for example, a phlebotomist tries to get the patient's blood 3 times, can't find the vein, the patient says, hey, could you find someone else? Then once they bring that to the attention of the nurse and the doctor, they can call the phlebotomy unit and you will accommodate the request and send someone else different down to try to get the patient's blood.
Objection, that's a very long, complicated question. As to form, you can answer.
You can answer.
You can answer.
Oh, I can answer.
If you remember it.
Can you say it again? I'm sorry.
Of course. In a case where a phlebotomist tries to get a patient's blood, they try 3 times, can't get the vein. The patient says, listen, could you please find someone else to draw my blood? And the phlebotomist brings it attention to the nurse and or the physician. And they call up to the unit and say, hey, can you send someone else down? Will you accommodate that request?
Objection, you can answer.
We will try to accommodate them if there is a phlebotomist there and we have someone that we can send up to that unit, then yes, they will certainly do that.
And how many phlebotomists are on duty during the midnight shift at the hospital back in March of 2013?
I do not know.
Did they have more than one?
We would have more than one.
Can you give me an idea? Is it 5, 10, 20?
I really don't know. Do you want me to give you a range?
Sure. Your best estimate.
My best estimate, and overnight.
Yes, ma'am.
Overnight.
The midnight shift we're talking about.
My best guess would be,
I don't want you to guess. I just
Yes,
want
I
your
object. It's
best
guessing.
estimate as to how many phlebotomists work the midnight shift at the hospital.
As of March of 2013, if you know.
I don't know how many we have overnight. Honestly, I don't know.
Is it more than one?
I would believe it's more than one.
Okay. And the phlebotomist division would cover the entire hospital for blood draws?
No.
What division of the hospital does the phlebotomy department cover?
There are some units that do not have phlebotomy coverage. I do not know all of them. I can give you some examples.
Okay.
Shock trauma draws their own blood samples. Some of our intensive care units, NICU, SICU, draw their own samples and don't have phlebotomy services come.
And if the phlebotomist is having trouble drawing the blood from the vein, and there's a dialysis catheter in place, is a phlebotomist allowed to draw blood from the catheter?
You can answer.
No.
Is that a policy or procedure?
May I look?
Yes, ma'am.
On 37,
Tab 37.
tab 37, number 11. Patients with catheters, central line, or PICC lines often have their blood drawn from these lines. However, before visualization, no draw. You must ask the nurse.
Either have to
Oh.
speak up or...
Okay,
yourself.
I'm going to read to myself. My understanding is we do not draw from catheters or central lines.
All right, so let's read paragraph number 11. I'll read it out loud. Patients with triple lumen catheters / central line or PICC lines often have their blood drawn from these lines. However, before returning the requisition as a no draw, you must ask the nurse if blood for this patient is drawn from their lines. So, in a case where the phlebotomist is unable to get the blood from the patient's arm, and if the patient has a triple lumen catheter, central line, or PICC line, the phlebotomist must ask the nurse if blood for this patient is drawn from their lines. Would that be a fair statement?
Objection. You can answer
Okay.
if you know.
So the phlebotomist does not draw from the line. The nurse could draw from the line, is my understanding. So before we say no draw because they have a central line, then we need to make sure we ask the nurse, is blood from this patient drawn from the central line, which the nurse would draw, or is there, some, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Is the phlebotomist supposed to document that they did ask the nurse when it says they must ask the nurse if blood's drawn for this patient is drawn from their lines? Do they have to document that they actually complied with that procedure?
Objection. You can answer.
Not that I'm aware of.
In this case, is there any documentation? I'm going to assume Mr. Allen had a triple lumen catheter or a central line or a PICC line, and the nurse was unable to draw the blood. Is there any documentation that you have in this case that would reference the nurse's compliance with that policy, where she did ask the nurse if blood for this patient is drawn from their lines?
I'm going to instruct her not to answer that question because the foundation is inaccurate. He did not have a triple line, a central line, or a PICC line on the morning of on the morning of March 18, 2013.
Is a dialysis catheter either a triple lumen line, a
Objection.
PICC line, or a central line?
I object. You can answer.
I don't know.
And you're only here to address 16, 17, 18, is that correct, Counsel?
That's correct.
Okay, that's all the questions I have now.
I don't have any questions, so we would like to reassign. So you're done.
Thank you.
This is the end of the deposition, going off the record as of 1:47 p.m. Thank you.